Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed, the podcast dedicated to talking about careers in the medtech industry. And today, I'm really excited to have the chance to speak with Thomas Meininghaus, who is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Ottobock, and we're going to be talking about how having a background in general management and operations can actually change and help your perception as a regulatory affairs professional. So, Thomas, can you maybe give us a brief intro in terms of who you are and what your role as regulatory affairs VP looks like?
Hi, Elena. Thanks first of all for having me on this podcast. My background is I'm a machine engineer with a PhD in material sciences, and I'm now in the medtech industry for more than 21 years in various positions and various medtech industries like hearing aids and the dental industry. And currently now I'm, as you mentioned it, Vice President for Regulatory Affairs at Ottobock, which is a more than 100-year-old leading medtech company, helping people gain new freedom of movement. And we develop, manufacture, and distribute prosthetic components and solutions, which we develop in 4 development hubs and sell in over 260 owned patient care centers worldwide.
Very interesting. And one thing that I have to say, so for those of the people who are listening and have access to LinkedIn, immediately upon checking out your profile, I have to say that you haven't followed a traditional path into regulatory affairs, which is really interesting, and that's why I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. How did you kind of first, with a background in machine learning and material science, how did you even get into medical devices?
Yeah, that's that's a funny story. Actually, it was the classical way. I was approached by a headhunter who, looking back retrospectively, probably mistook my Procter & Gamble experience in femcare production as deep insights in medical device industry, and that's why I was addressed and asked to, and he offered me a position at GN Resound in Germany as the technical director, and that was beginning of 2000, and basically started my my medtech career path, from the very beginning.
And how did the so at the time you were working at Procter & Gamble, you said, and is this the role where you were initiative manager, the project manager for femcare?
Right, exactly. And I was working in operations, we basically rolled out a new production line worldwide. The first lead lines, production lines, so to say, were located in Kreilsheim, and I set them up, commissioned them, and then later on owned the initiative to roll it out worldwide in all the Procter & Gamble sites. And it was really a new platform, a new technology, because the old production conveyors, they were driven by pulleys with gears, gearboxes, etc. And that was a complete change over to servo technology, which allowed much faster format changes, because speed matters, especially for a consumer product company like Procter & Gamble, who want to roll out their new products and new initiatives as soon as and fast as possible throughout the world. And so I guess that was what caught the eye of the headhunter, and thought, well, if the guy knows how to manufacture for Procter & Gamble femcare products like Always and All Days, then this sounds like medical devices, so he might be capable of supporting us in basically restructuring the hearing aid manufacturing processes, especially for custom-made products. And that's how I started off at GN Resound.
Do you know, it's really interesting, especially because you're talking about being approached by a headhunter, because I have to say, if I reflect back on my career in the last 9 years that I've been doing recruitment, all of my placements are good placements, but some of the most interesting ones are when I bring people from outside of industry, or when I bring people from a slightly different industry to a position to really shake things up or to do things differently. And I think, you know, for companies, you know, they very often look for somebody that's done it before, that's proven and tested in that industry in a very similar role, and they typically look for that type of experience. But when you have a hiring manager that is open to actually taking somebody that's a little bit more disruptive in terms of bringing new ideas, and that's really where you see transformation as opposed to small incremental improvements. So I think that's really interesting, and obviously I've got living proof sitting here in front of me talking to you, Thomas. So I think my big question is then, so when you kind of made your first move into medical devices, coming from a consumer goods background, what kind of similarities did you see, and what differences did you see moving across industries?
Well, what they all have in common, especially if we're talking about a production manager, operations manager, is basically the focus on productivity, reduction of lead time, scrap reduction, and such kind of things. And that you actually have under much higher pressure in the broad industry, like you have with Procter and Gamble, than you have in the medtech industry, because usually the margins are a little bit better in the medtech industry, and the pain is not, at least at that point of time, it was not as high to basically manage an operation in such a way that it would actually have a substantial input on the EBITDA margin of the company's performance. But the biggest challenge at that point of time was that GN Resound was at that point of time a conglomerate of bought together companies from various hearing aid manufacturers. And so we had a broad product portfolio and very specialized technicians who were partly so specialized that they could only repair certain brands and products. Besides that, the facility when I started was not at all suitable for a production site. So when we moved into a different location at that point of time, which was also my part of my job, because I was in charge of the supply chain. So I managed the relocation. We basically changed the whole world. We went from one technician repairs a complete device to one-piece flow manufacturing, which was basically, we split the work up into different work packages, understood and evaluated in detail the volumes and the process flow that was needed to fulfill the task. And basically over approximately 1.5 to 2 years, we were able to improve the performance of the German organization of the operations from being more or less last on the performance list of GN to becoming one of the benchmark sites. And by doing that and following, at the end of the day, the 21 CFR and the site conditions that you also have in the ISO world, we were capable of reducing turnaround time substantially from 2.5 weeks down to 3 to 5 days, and reduced also the overall product quality, especially for the custom-made products. And it was, first of all, because and that was one of the challenges in the industry, I had no clue and no idea about hearing instruments and what would be perceived as a good hearing instrument and what would not meet our customers' expectations. So I spent a lot of time with the sales team on the road to travel and to see customers who were, usually they took me to customers that were not happy with what we did. And so we played the good cop, bad cop game. And I took all the blame rightfully, because we, in the very beginning, we really were not very good, and there was lots of room for improvement. But this kind of approach was the basis actually later on for a better and much deeper understanding for the market, for the customer needs. And it helped me also in my later professional career, when I started to own my own dispenser shops for hearing instruments, and basically knew exactly how to pick the right suppliers and what to look out for and what not. That was, so the challenge was new products, new market, new dynamics, and a completely different, how do you call it, relation management that you have, especially when you talk about medical device custom made, than you have it with consumer products who sell in the millions or even higher numbers. Yeah, and basically my first touch points with the regulations were that I understood very soon that all the process improvements and everything that I applied to the operation had to fulfill the regulatory requirements. Mm-hmm. And looking backwards, I must say that, especially if you take the 21 CFR 820 regulations, I cannot imagine how you can actually run an operation or even a company other than following those regulations. I mean, it's really a great little booklet. You get it from the FDA, printed in the paper version. It's very small, only a couple of dozen pages thick, but it says it all. It explains how the various departments interact and depend on each other, and it's actually one of the best management Bibles that I've ever read, and that was exciting to understand and learn the power that well-defined processes and work instructions actually have. How it helps you to understand really the complaints of the customers and dig into it, and if necessary, open up a kappa, mm-hmm. And really spend some in-depth analytics on identifying what is actually driving the problem that we see at hand. Mm-hmm. So, and then somehow it came all together. The good thing was that I had the chance to develop into that position and also into the side condition that came along with it. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we basically had the benchmark operation within GN Resound, and we were so good that against other usual common approaches, we consolidated operation volume in Germany, which is very uncommon. Usually, you outsource to low-cost operation countries. Mm-hmm. But the operation was ticking like a clockwork, and in 99% of all cases, we actually held the communicated lead times, and we performed constant surveys asking customer about their satisfaction in regard to service quality, lead time, and we did mystery shoppings with competitors and evaluated everything from the packaging to the up to the invoice. Are they readable? Are they understandable? How many pages is it long? Up to repair units that were sent back from some competitors with a couple of sweets in there, mm-hmm. just for lightening up the mood a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So we looked at that. We were open to benchmark ourselves, and we always strive to be the best and really outperform the market here and the competition. Mm-hmm. And I could not have done that without the structure the regulations actually provide you as a framework, because that's really one of the most powerful advantages. Is it gives you a framework and an orientation. Another example, when you have issues with your turnaround time, yeah, you should better take a look at the qualification of your employees. Are they qualified? Do you have objective evidence for that? Is the qualification material, like the work instructions, is that adequately written? Is it understandable? Yeah? Do the people know what they actually have to do? And if you really follow it back, and if you really drill it open, it is such a powerful tool, this kind of framework and structure to use, that it is almost unbeatable.
That's so interesting because, you know, like I speak to a lot of regulatory people and non-regulatory people, and sometimes, you know, like I see this like very clear divide where it's like anything to do with regulation, it falls under the hat of the regulatory department, and so like it's not within my remit. It's not, you know, something that I need to really know myself in too much detail. I'll just, you know, ask the regulatory team or expect them to come forward with the information. And I think this is like one of the first times that I'm speaking to somebody that was talking about being in an operations role, but really saying that, you know, the 21 CFR is what did you say, the best management Bible ever. How how important do you think it is to kind of diversify your knowledge outside of your functional?
I think it's vital if you want to perform and do a good job. It's everything, you know, it's all about not thinking in silos, but and that's also something that you learn when you deal with the regulations. Everything has a cause and effect, and every process has a previous process step. And the only thing how to improve the result as a whole is to take the previous and the following process steps into account. And that usually means you have to leave your silo and also show interest and understand the concerns and the problems of the other areas. So it helps so much coming to the right decisions if you forget about regulations as just for the sake of regulations, but understand it as a framework and as a guiding principle. Also, I have to say that what you just described and mentioned is obviously a very poor marketing for this area of expertise, because what you often see is that the regulatory teams are regarded as a show blocker, as the ones that block things off, say no to everything, and are very cumbersome in general to work with, which is actually not the case. But what I have experienced in the past is a lack of understanding each other. You know, a good RA guy should never use the word regulations, should especially not quote any regulations, because that's always up for interpretation. And usually the organization looks for clear and straightforward answers. And for that, you as a regulatory person have to understand, what is it the organization really wants? Do they really not want to have a certain article as a non-medical device? Or do they just want to go for a non-medical device declaration because then they think it would be speed up the availability for the market? It's all about really understanding what the organization and the business actually wants, and then trying to, and for that understanding, you need to really look over the fences, left and right, and up and down. I need to take all of that into considerations.
I think that's a really valid point that you make, because, you know, a lot of the roles that I would work on, you'll see even written in some of the job descriptions that we recruit, we talk about commercial approach to regulatory affairs, or understanding the business. And when I talk to CEOs, that's something that, you know, they expect without even knowing that they expect it. Somebody that actually is able to be kind of solution oriented and understand how to navigate or how to work through these gray areas, always keeping in mind the business needs. And that's something that you just touched on, which was really interesting. But how can you make that practical? So for all the regulatory people that are maybe listening to this episode, what sort of key questions or things can they do in order to position themselves or to get a better understanding of that business need?
First of all, try to take the position of the business person you are talking to and try to understand what they really want. And I mean really want, not what they say, but what they actually want. And often there is a difference in between the spoken word and the inlaying wishes and expectations here. And that's the first thing to really uncover and to really find out what it actually is. Once you have done that, once you have understood what they want, you should actually try to identify how you can do good to the business, how you can resolve the problem. So at the end, it's about selling the benefits. And doing that ideally without quoting any regulations, without referring to them, but really trying to look and provide the solution room that will really do the business good. And that's when you are already, when you have already done the first big step forward. And regulatory affairs / quality management, depending on how the organization is cut, can actually step up to what they really can be, namely business enablers and not blocker. Enabling the business, that's the biggest challenge here. But you can only enable if you've really understood what it is the business actually wants.
So digging more into that, because I think you already spoke about understanding maybe what that business person, really trying to understand, get to the root of what they want as opposed to what they say they want. Some people might be listening to this and saying, I'm not a mind reader, so how can I actually know? So what would be your advice on how to actually get to the root of what they want past the words that they say?
Well, I can only share with you my usual approach here. I usually try to map everything that I hear into a process landscape. And I try to figure out, when I hear about some of the challenges or requests or expectations, I'll try to figure out in a mind map, so to say, what could actually cause or prevent this certain issue from happening, or if it is a required and wanted change, what could actually drive that? And then I ask more questions. It's about asking open questions and listening. Listening, I think, is one of the major skills and patience that you need there in order to really reveal what's going on. I'll give you an example. When I joined Ottobock, I was tasked with ensuring that our patient care centers would be MDR compliant. And we've got about, in Europe, 170 patient care centers, which are point of care / point of sales, where CPOs actually sell prosthetics to patients and fit them. Many of them are custom made. And those colleagues take great pride out of their skilled work, are skilled artists, and are great listeners and caring people. But there's one thing they hate more than everything, and that is basically documentation, administration, and especially when they hear the word quality management, they start to scream and run. So, which is understandable to some extent, because we are talking here usually about craftsmanship's abilities that we have them, and very talented one, but not their competencies and expertise lies not exactly in business administration. So there was no way you could actually force them to update their quality management system in order to become MDR compliant, so to say. So the approach that we went for was we designed an IT solution, a web-based solution, and everyone serves the web, so that should be pretty easy to work with. And we called it MDR Suite. That's basically a landing page from which you can click yourself to various modules. And it starts with the first module, basically, and that's called, how do I explain the MDR and their changes to my team? Full stop. A presentation package for the local managing directors in the patient care centers who can actually take that presentation and explain to their staff, hey, what is it that's coming, that's lying ahead of us? What do we need to do? The second model contains an animated questionnaire, basically asking, what role does my shop fulfill? There are different economic operator roles, and depending on the operator, economic operator roles you are fulfilling, you have to provide different kind of documentation and prepare your organization differently. So once I went through the questionnaire, they actually knew what roles they were taking in. And then we had this third module that contained a brief presentation about the rights and duties of a PRRC, person responsible for regulatory compliance, according to Article 50, and a template for the nomination letter. So they could actually sit down with one identified candidate and explain to them, what is it that we expect from you? Mm-hmm. What are your duties and what are your responsibilities? And by the way, here's the nomination letter. The fourth module provides the work instruction for the 4 main processes that needed to be implemented with the MDR. And they were all provided in as a Word document so that it could easily be adapted and then later on fit into the local quality management systems. And the last module contained a configurator with which they actually choose the products that they fit to a patient. And this kind of configurator automatically provided the right documentation set, including declaration of conformities, IFUs, patient statements, etc. So we made it look really attractive from a look and feel and how to navigate it with pictures and pictograms. And it was so well perceived by our own organization and also the sales organization that they thought, hey, that's something we can actually offer to all of our customers and not only our own patient care centers. So how did we get there? Because we really tried to identify what would actually keep somebody in a patient care center from implementing MDR requirements. And that starts with very simple and easy things. Number one, he needs to explain it to somebody and he needs some documentation for that. And then we also, you wouldn't believe how challenging it is for some to create a nomination letter in Word by themselves. So we provided all that with a very comprehensive Q&A area where we basically collected from all the patient care centers, all the questions that came up during the implementation phase, preparation and training phases. And we put together a glossary for all the questions to provide consistent answers. So the approach that we went for was, even though this is a regulatory topic on the one hand, we treated and solved it from a business point of view and try to sell benefit because now you don't have to tell the organization to use it. They will use it because it's so attractive, easy to navigate through, responsive, contains all the information that they need. So that describes it actually pretty well of how you can impact the business from a regulatory point of view.
That's really interesting as well, and that's obviously like thinking outside of the box. It's so different than just like plonking down you know, the printed MDR and saying like, this is the new regulation and what we have to do, but this is making it, you know, more kind of like bite size. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with easy. I think like anyone will do something if they can see that it's in their benefit and it's easy for them to do. And we find that very often, even with companies that we're working with, you know, we will provide them, you know, interview questions to ask to candidates, for example, you know, and a scoring template to help them score the candidates, you know, and rate the candidates on an equal scale, because, you know, otherwise if you speak to a company and say, okay, well, what questions are you going to ask, or how are you going to, do you have a scoring template, it's effort for them to sit there and create it and actually do the thinking. So a lot of the time, if you can understand what their needs are and actually the problems that they face and what's, as you said, preventing them, and you give them a solution that's easy to use, that meets their needs, you don't need to make it a mandatory thing to do. They will automatically do it because they believe in it and they can see how it's actually making their life easier.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically you hit the nail on the head. It's about understanding your customer needs, right? And to make life easy for your customer base. And we took the same approach. We tried to figure out what needs to be true in order to make life easier. And one of the tasks of RA in this content is to translate this hilariously thick and unreadable MDR guideline and translate it to the language of your company and condense it to what actually is of importance for your company, for your position, and do this kind of condensation and then think about how you can make this, how you can establish it, how you can roll it out and implement it. And if something is not easy, then it's probably not the right answer, because things are not that difficult. They are pretty straightforward. And usually when you see phrases and sentences and formulations that are highly complex and where you on the third line have already forgotten what the first line actually started with it in that sentence, chances are pretty high that the author of that document and of that sentence has himself not understood what he's talking about. It's all about boiling it down.
Is the saying like, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't understand it well enough yourself? There's that concept of like, 100%, and especially when you're dealing with business people, it's about being able to be concise and to the point, and simplifying things as much as possible. You know, like if you could, why say something in 30 words if you can say it in 15 and the person you're speaking to actually still understands the same message. So I think that's 100% really, really valuable advice. So coming back to this thing of, obviously in your experience with general management and operations, you already spoke and gave a very good example of how to provide solutions that are supporting the business. What other tips and advice can you give to us? What else can regulatory learn from general management and operations?
First of all, and we already spoke about this, choose a simple language. Always strive to be understood correctly. There is no use in quoting regulations when you speak with somebody who has has no expertise in that. It's meaningless. You need to understand his language, and you have to be able to translate the regulations into a language that is understood by the company you're working for. So that's ground level number one. Number two, really try to understand what is it your business partner actually really wants. And most often enough, it's not what they say in their opening, what it actually is they want. You really need to ask, the 5 why principle. You need to ask why for at least 3 to 4 times, so that you reveal what it's actually about. Sorry. And in regard to general management, the biggest advice I can only give, and what differentiate a good general management from a not so successful general management, is that they listen and that they trust. And understand that it is part of the nature of your regulatory and quality team to say no from time to time. But usually it's about finding solutions that are, and very common term in this regard is risk-based approach, right? Which goes a little bit into the direction that you mentioned earlier with commercially oriented RA or quality guys that are being sought for. You also have to be, sometimes you have to be bold, and it does not help if you try to drive the car with a cushion, with an airbag, with a safety belt, and that. Especially, that's how I understand the risk-based approach. If it is fair and explainable that you leave at some point of time certain things out, or that you reduce the effort in certain areas, because obviously when you have objective evidence and proof that certain things work perfectly fine, and when you have the right tools in place and the right procedures and systems established, you can go. The regulations give you lots of freedom to navigate, and also in a very business-like manner through it, and to support the business. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we kind of skipped out part of your career though, Thomas, right? So that we had the moment where we were talking about the experience that you had in operations, and then we jumped straight to your role right now as VP of Regulatory, and all these great solution orientated approaches that you've been working on. So how did you actually get in? So what was the moment where you said, I'm actually going to now pursue a career or a role in regulatory affairs?
Yeah, that was also a funny moment. Roger Radke, the former CEO from Siemens Audiology, which is now known as Sivantos, he wanted me as the group-wide vice president for quality management and regulatory affairs. And at that point of time, I had no track record in that area. I had been in other positions, and I shared my concerns with him. And I said, Roger, are you sure that you want me? I don't have a track record in those areas. And he said, Thomas, you know the industry, the products, you've run your own shops, and you know how the customer tick. We can train you in quality and regulatory pretty fast, but it will take years the other way around. So we tried it, and it worked out pretty good actually. And he understood much earlier than I did that this kind of broader experience, this kind of broader general manager and production and operations experience, you cannot replace that with theories, and that is an actually foundation for future decision-making processes from a regulatory point of view. Yeah, and I must admit I've applied the same logic a couple of times since then myself.
Really?
Yeah.
Because it's also a type of diversity, isn't it? When it comes to hiring, and if you're hiring people, if you're building a team of all the different kind of diversity that we're talking about, but then also if you actually are hiring a diverse team in terms of the backgrounds that they're coming from and the experiences that they have, you're bringing a fresh pair of eyes, you know, to the table that is going to challenge the status quo of how things have always been done. And that's an example, you know, as you said, that's where you get transformational change for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm sure that when you were hiring people, Thomas, outside of like the classic box, you would have received some pushback, or there would have been some risk associated with that, no?
Yeah, I mean, you know how it is. If you are in a hiring process, saying no to somebody is the easiest and the easiest way to go. It's saying yes to somebody that requires a lot of guts and is the risk-taking approach here, especially if you think a little bit outside the box. But here, I look at much more than just the mere educational background. I look at attitude.
Mm-hmm.
If the attitude is there, and if we have the right candidate show and demonstrate business orientation and also ambition to in a healthy way, and also openness to collaborate with others, then that's already a very first good step forward into becoming placing that somebody on a new position.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and literally any day, if you had, you know, somebody who looks amazing on paper but the attitude is not there, or somebody who, you know, looks okay on paper, who has some gaps, but they really have the right attitude and the right cultural fit for the company, you know, it's not even a question really, is it, of kind of where you go. That's really so. Okay, so let's talk about best advice you've ever been given, because we've spoken loads about your advice for other people. So what has been the best piece of advice that you've ever been given in your career?
The best piece of advice was given by an old manager of mine to me, who insisted to never go into discussions with pre-formed opinions, stay open, and disregard any organizational boundaries, and just look at the processes themselves, and stay open and focus on the business. Always make sure and try to understand what makes life easy for your customer, whoever your customer actually is. If you sell benefit, and if you contribute to make people's life better, then you are bound to be on the right path.
Some great advice there, so thank you for that. And it's obviously advice that you're living by, that you've been living by yourself, based on some of these examples that you've shared. Is there anybody who like particularly inspires you right now? So who would be your biggest inspiration?
Well, it's not a person that inspires me. It's the right attitude in people that I find inspiring, depending on their role, their position, or whatever it is. But that's what really inspires me and motivates me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you speak about, because you've spoken quite a bit about attitude, how do you, like, what's your formula to identifying if somebody is having the right attitudes for your business or for your team?
Well, it's looking at how he or she communicates, how open a team member is to admit that he was wrong. And there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. It's suspicious if somebody does not make any mistakes. So everyone makes mistakes, me as well. But it's how you deal with that, how mature you are, and what you take out of that, and how you develop then in the next time you are in a similar situation. That's what I'm looking at. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Thank you so much, Thomas. I think it's been a really interesting conversation, like taking, the different viewpoints and applying them specifically in a regulatory context and what you've learned. And I'm sure people are going to be walking away from this episode with loads of action points and key takeaways. So it's that time where I ask you the question that I love to ask everybody, the big picture question, which is, what is the legacy that you want to leave on the world?
Very easy. That I contributed to make things easier and better. That's it. If I leave at some point of time and I'm being remembered as the person that actually made a difference and to the better, that will be it.
That's a very strong sense of purpose and direction, but I think that's that's very powerful as well, isn't it? But thank you so much, Thomas. I think it's been really fascinating talking to you and hearing about all these solutions. And to all of you listening in, I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Please give it a thumbs up, share your comments, connect with Thomas on LinkedIn, and listen out for our next episode that will be coming in 2 weeks' time. Have a great day, everybody, and stay safe.
Thanks for having me, Elena. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.